Hi, everybody. This is Mason Richey again from Asia Society Korea. We're happy to have our audience here with us today, as we're going to be doing what, in my estimation, is one of the most interesting of these roundtables that we do every month. This time it's about culture. As you know, we do a lot of things here that deal with politics and with social issues. And this time we're branching out a little bit, and we're doing a program on culture, and in particular performance artists in Korea, and even more particularly on music and the performing artistry of musicians here in Korea. We have three absolutely outstanding guests with us today, some of the most accomplished people in the world in their field, and I'll go ahead and briefly introduce them now. I won't give their full bios. You can look at that on the Asia Society Korea webpage. But just to give you a little bit of the taste of the expertise and the artistry that we have with us here today, I would like to first start by introducing Jocelyn Clark, who is a professor of East Asian Studies in the Liberal Arts Department at Pai Chai University. She got her PhD from Harvard University in East Asian Languages and Civilizations. Since then, she has held fellowships at the National Gugak Center, the Fulbright Foundation, the Sonam Foundation, Korea University, the Korea Center at Harvard, and the Korea Foundation, among other places. As a scholar, she has written articles in academic journals such as The World of Music, Asian Musicology, Perspectives on Korean Music. And her research interests include the music of place, orality, aesthetics, contemporary national music, and performance arts practices in Korea, China, and Japan. And she is also an expert player of the gaegam, to the extent, in fact, that she is the first foreigner to be officially entered into the intangible cultural asset system in Korea for her expertise with the gaegam. Next, we have Nemo Kim, who is a journalist based in Seoul and who writes on the two Koreas for The Guardian and Billboard. She's reported on the Korean Peninsula and related issues for BBC World TV, the BBC World Service, the Variety, Nikkei Asia Review, CNN. Prior to this, she was the Seoul business correspondent at NHK World of Japan. Previously, she's anchored a daily news program at KBS World Radio. And before that, she was a news producer at the KBS London Bureau. Ms. Kim has taught Korean politics and diplomacy, social issues in Korea and Korean popular culture at Korea University, Suncheonhyang University, Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, where I'm also a professor. And she's also designed and currently teaches a course in screen translation at the Literature and Translation Institute under South Korea's Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism. And last but not least, we have violinist Haesung Choe, who is currently a member of the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra. In addition, she's given performances as a soloist and a chamber musician at diverse festivals and music venues throughout Europe and South Korea, such as the Festival Archipel, Milano Musica, the Bologna Festival, the Tongyang Music Festival, the Cité de la Musique Paris, and many others. She's appeared as a soloist with the Seoul Symphony Orchestra, the Orchestra Chambre de Lausanne, Timisoara Philharmonic, and the Gunsan Philharmonic Orchestra. She is a devoted performer of the music of our time, with solo repertoires including the music of Yanis Xenakis, Salvatore Ciarino, Luigi Nono, Isong Yan, and others. She's played as a concert master in the Ensemble Contretemps in Geneva. She's also formed a unique recorder violin duo called Octopus, for whom many composers have dedicated some of their new pieces. She started her musical career and her study art at the age of 5. She got her bachelor's degree from Korea National University of Arts, a master's degree from the Manhattan School of Music, and a diplôme de soloiste from the Conservatoire de Lausanne in Switzerland. She was a member of the quartet Gaia up until 2016, and as I mentioned, currently still a member of the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra. I should also note that she's a personal friend of mine, and quite frankly, one of the nicest people in the entire world. So all of that being said, I'm going to get straight into the questions, and I want to start with one to Jocelyn and Haesung. How did you become interested in performing music, and particularly on the instruments in which you specialize?
Want to go first, Haesung? Oh, I thought I was gonna let you go first. Okay, I'll go first then. Okay, so I think that really has a lot to do with Korean history. So when I was little, my parents used to play the violin, so they all had this longing for Western culture, I think. So like everybody was singing in the 1970s the pop songs, Beatles, and like classical music was like kind of like their fantasy. So that's how my parents met, playing the string quartet together. So my mom was my first teacher. So this is how I started the violin. Yeah. How
Okay.
about you, Josh?
I also started on the violin when I was a young little tyke. Um, but then we moved to Alaska and there was no teachers anymore. So I played a little piano, played a little clarinet, played oboe in the symphony. And when I graduated from high school, I thought that was what music was. But then I got into, then I was in, went to high school in Japan for another extra year. And actually, I still studied the oboe there. But when I came back, I went to Wesleyan University, which was famous for ethnomusicology, which is something I hadn't really heard of until then. And they had just started a Japanese music program, restarted their Japanese music program at the school. And I basically started just to practice my Japanese because I just come back from Japan and I was excited about Japan and Japanese culture. And the Sawai Koto School had a dream to make Japanese young students more interested in traditional music, which was sort of dying away as it is everywhere in the world. So their dream was, they thought, well, if they could get like young foreigners interested in Japanese music and bring them to Japan to play, then that would get the Japanese kids interested because for many of the reasons that you said, Haesung, kids were not very focused on traditional things in East Asia. So as soon as I played that instrument, the first note, I just fell in love with the sound and I quit everything else and just played koto for the whole year. But then 1 year later, my other passion is calligraphy. So I wanted to study calligraphy and they wouldn't let me into the class without studying Chinese. So I started studying Chinese and then I went to China and found this, the same instrument that's related to the koto there. And then I heard that they have it in Korea too. So after I graduated from college, I came to I wanted to compare cultures to music, which is basically what ethnomusicology is, but I wasn't studying that at the time. I was more interested in being a diplomat. In any case, I ended up coming to Korea in 1992 with a scholarship to the National Kugak Center, what they call the Kugak Center now. It used to be called the National Classical Music Institute. But yeah, I started it basically when I got here. And it took me some time to understand what Korean music was all about. But having been on a scholarship, I put a lot of effort into trying to understand why I didn't understand it at first and what was different and, what were the sort of challenges to learning. And of course, that was already 28 years ago. So it's been an interesting and long journey.
Great. Well, that's what they say, right? The journey is the destination. So I'm going to sort of follow up, I guess, then with you, Jocelyn, and ask a question that I hope you don't find irritating or in any way insulting. So I'll be careful here. But actually, if you wanted the truth, I'm going to blame this question on Haesung because he was the one who first pointed this out to me. When we were thinking about putting this topic together, and I thought it would be nice to have a couple of musicians actually, be a part of the discussion and hopefully also play something as well, which I know we'll get to at the end. Haesung pointed out that she's playing what is traditionally considered a Western instrument, the violin. Although she's Korean, and you, Jocelyn, you're playing a traditional Korean instrument, even though you're from the U.S. And I tend, at least I hope I tend not to think of these types of distinctions so much. I like to tell myself at least that I try to think of these things in a way that's sort of cosmopolitan. But as soon as Haesung pointed that out, I thought to myself, well, that's actually quite fascinating, and that's clearly something that's worth bringing up and exploring a little bit. So. to get to my question, you're playing a traditional Korean instrument, the gaegum. You also play other traditional instruments from Japan and China, as I understand it. How do you inhabit that space culturally and personally? Are there any problems, hints of accusations of cultural appropriation on your part, or does your status as being someone from the U.S. playing a traditional Korean instrument offer mostly positive opportunities?
It's there's different ways to look at it. What I'm doing isn't usually considered appropriation. Appropriation, really comes with an inappropriate adoption of customs, or using something without any sort of deep knowledge in it, and without permission from the people who are the real practitioners of it. Having come to live in Korea and started from the beginning and subjected myself to the whole system here, I've been studying for 28 years, and learning, from the beginning and every step in between. And this is not usually considered appropriation. So the fact that I've been taken, I've gone through the exams, I've gone through the what do you call it? The system of my English is going away. I'm thinking in Korean once I start talking about kayagum. The system of
Was that in
competitions, the competition system. So, in Korea, of course, in the very beginning, when you can't play very well, that's where you get a lot of people are like, and but after 28 years, I'm sort of playing on the, at least on the pieces that I do play, at a similar level to my colleagues. So, it's not really cultural appropriation in this context. If, on the other hand, I was in America and I just bought myself a kayagum and I started, playing however I wanted to and opened a YouTube channel, that would be more like what the problems of appropriation are. So,
well, if I could just jump in for a second, clearly you've gotten tremendous recognition insofar as you're registered in this intangible cultural assets system. But I still wonder if there are people who are perhaps ignorantly criticizing you for maybe, even though you've been studying this for a long time, and have become an expert in it, not somehow truly understanding it. That there's an ethnic component to that which might come out occasionally, or is that something that's passed since you've been here so long, working on it so long?
Yeah, I'm not getting pushback from people.
Okay.
In the very beginning, when I first started playing, there was the Koreans, because kayagum is sort of thought of as the national instrument. Musicians told me when I first started that there's no way you can reach any level as a kayagum player. And I thought, well, that makes sense, because, as Haesung started violin when she was 5, I also started violin when I was 3? These kind of sounds get into your body and deeply ingrained in you from a very early age, and it takes time. It really takes time. So I started kayagum when I was 22. I started koto when I was 17. Kayagum when I was 22. And yeah, over time, I've definitely had a foreign accent and played like a foreigner for a long time. But I've overcome that by now. I wouldn't say I've completely overcome that, but the question, I think, has changed around Kugak itself, because when I first came here in 1992, when before Kim Yong-sam was elected president, that was a time when all the old masters were still around, and Kugak was still heard around much more than it is today. I would say today it's heard in different ways, but people were still sort of used to Korean sounds. People grew up on hearing Korean sounds and Korean music. Kids today mostly grew up with Western music in their ears. So I would say that the whole country in a way has become aesthetically foreign or Western in some way. Kids grow up listening to K-pop instead of anything Korean music. I mean, what we call Korean is already something that we need to question and discuss, right? What does it mean to be Korean? I mean, probably we can say that playing the violin is the most Korean thing you can actually do. So, we have to question what is Korean, what is not Korean. And of course, there's colonial history and all sorts of histories that they're behind, why Haesung plays violin and not the kayagum. And, that has to do with the history of all sorts of appropriations and colonial situations and, power and history and all those things. And, a lot of Western music came to Korea not necessarily through the West, but also through Japan, right? Who also has a different history than with the West than Korea has. So we have to think of all those things. But as far as me getting pushback now, that's not been much of an issue. There's some specific people and players who don't like the idea of foreigners playing Korean music, and of course I can understand that. But in general, I've been very, very, I've been accepted as part of the community here, and I really appreciate that. But it's not for the faint of heart, I have to say. it's a long and difficult journey. Yeah,
for sure. I can tell. I mean, 28 years. But it's super for you that you've had this sort of official national level recognition. I think that's quite an honor, and we're honored to have you. I think it's
something I think about. Yeah, this question of appropriation and identity
sure.
is every day is something I think about every day. Yeah.
Sure, and clearly you have, and I also know I think your observation that when you first came here, there were a lot of Koreans who still had very vivid memories of hearing, as you called it, Korean sounds, from their childhood and even up into their adulthood, whereas now that's less the case. I think that's a sort of a fascinating observation. Haesung, so to sort of switch around to the other way, you on the other hand play the violin. It's interesting that Jocelyn refers to that as like the most Korean thing that you can play in some ways, in the contemporary world. And that actually goes to something that I was thinking about when I was, putting together in my head some questions to ask all of you. The violin I do sort of consider to be this sort of universal or cosmopolitan orchestral instrument. So let me ask you kind of the same question. How do you inhabit that space? And then if I can flip around a little bit from what I asked Jocelyn and say, how do you, to the extent that you do, maintain roots with Korean traditional music?
Well, yeah, it's true. Playing the violin now, there are like so many Korean violinists out there in the classical world field, the classical music world. They are so famous. They are just super stars. And yeah, it's true. Violin or any other classical or Western instrument just became so popular in Korea. And also because actually I totally agree with Jocelyn. It has to do with the history and the colonial and the idea we grew up with this longing for Western culture. So, for example, in the elementary school, we used to learn a lot of folk songs from European countries or America, but talking about ethnic music, like we didn't get to learn Japanese traditional music or Indonesian traditional music, which is Asia, which is part of the culture. So we just learned all these folk songs from Western culture, learning that these are music. So we just didn't even realize actually there was any other kind of possibilities in music. So so that's my general thought. And so actually I was totally ignorant in Korean music until I was living in Korea. So I graduated my university. I had a little bit of Korean music theory, but it was just kind of school thing that we had to do a little bit. And then after I lived outside of Korea, I lived in Europe for 12 years. And then it's only after I came back that I really started to appreciate Korean music in a totally different way. And what Jocelyn was saying about Korean music in the beginning, actually, she had to understand why she could not understand this music. And actually, talking about classical music, I think we have the same problem as a classical musician. So of course now the K-pop or popular music is very, very popular, but in terms of classical music, like if you talk about Bach or Beethoven, and I think we actually have the same problem. So, and after having learned that for all these years, and then coming back to Korean music was such a fascinating world, and especially after having played contemporary music composed by Western contemporary music composers. And actually they had tendency to go back to the philosophy of Asian music, like with all the microtones and then the beats that are not regular. So I started to see Korean music in a totally different year. And actually with a lot of things about Korea that I learned so much from my foreign friends who live in Korea, because they actually really went to study deeply in Korean culture. So I really must say that I must thank all my foreign friends for letting me, like for teaching me a lot about Korean culture and Korean music. Yeah, and actually, if you hadn't heard Jocelyn play, then maybe you can just think of, maybe a Western woman playing gayagum. Yeah, it could sound kind of like, yeah. But actually, I really must say how much I appreciated playing with Jocelyn. I could totally forget actually I was playing with a non-Korean musician. Yeah. So yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Super. I'll just jump in and I'll say for those in the audience, the surprise at the end of this roundtable is that Haesung and Jocelyn are going to play a duet together, which I will have them introduce towards the end of the conversation, and that will be the way that we end this. So Jocelyn and Haesung were very kind in taking extra time in addition to the roundtable to also do this recording for us. I think it's an interesting point you make, Haesung, how you can learn something about your own culture from people who are, outside of it and or originally outside of it and make their way into it. I know in my case, learning foreign languages, I actually ended up frequently learning, as much about English through learning a foreign language. And also I frequently learn more about English by talking with non-native English speakers who maybe ask me questions or use a locution, which is unusual, or a vocabulary word, which, is maybe one that is a bit unusual. So I can clearly imagine that could be the same thing in your case, in terms of, traditional Korean music and your experience with, people from outside of Korea who have, perhaps helped you to learn more about that yourself. So turning briefly away from, traditional Korean music and also from classical music, and switching gears to talk about something that we've already heard intimated today, at least by both of our first two guests, namely the big 800-pound gorilla in the musical cultural space in Korea, namely K-pop and the industry behind it. I want to switch a little bit over to that topic and turn to Nemo Kim. Nemo, how important is culture, and especially the performing arts in terms of music, to Korea's entertainment landscape? And in particular, how important is the K-pop music industry dimension of that? And how important is that also to Korea's soft power abroad?
Right. Well, I would say culture, especially the performing arts, has really a vital connection to South Korea's entertainment scene. And more, the line between the classical scene and the traditional Korean music scene and the entertainment scene is becoming more and more blurry by day. We're seeing a lot more performers than before, performers who specialize in what's called fusion music, combining aspects of traditional Korean music with K-pop, K-hip-hop, and so on. And what's quite interesting is that we're seeing those kind of performances on major K-pop channels like Mnet, which is one of the channels that specialize in K-pop. So we've had people like Shapgon, who is a hip-hop artist, who collaborated with a pansori performer called Kang Moon-hee, and the whole performance was on Mnet, which and it was a couple of years ago, and a lot of people really enjoyed it. And I think it was the first time that many Korean teenagers who were only interested in hip hop had seen such a performance, such a collaboration. And also, another interesting aspect in the K-pop world is that an unexpected number of K-pop idols, they were former students of classical music or traditional Korean music or dance. So we only need to look at BTS. We have Jimin from BTS, who was a student of dance in Busan before he joined BTS, and also J-Hope, who was also one of the well-known names in his native town of Gwangju before he became a member. So, you know, I wouldn't say they're totally like separate scenes per se, but it seems that a lot of recruitment for K-pop idols is happening in various scenes, and I think in terms of aspects of the traditional scene, we only need to look at the latest music video from Blackpink, which features very highly customized, mind you, but they're all in hanbok. So the sales of hanbok shot up. I know a lot of people don't feel very happy about the fact that the hanbok featured in the music video does not look very traditional, but so in terms of the relationship between the performing arts and Korea's soft power, I would say many fans of the Korean wave, Hallyu, around the world, they start off being interested in K-pop and K-pop boy bands, girl bands, and so on. And then a lot of them branch out into other aspects of Korea. For example, maybe Korean cinema, and also they become interested in Korean performing arts and so on. And some of these songs performed by K-pop artists have quite interesting aspects. Like we have the hip-hop artist BY, who actually made a track about the colonization period, no less. So, so it is quite common for K-pop fans to become interested in other aspects of the entertainment scene, as well as the performing arts and the rest of Korea, including Korean history. So I would say that, the fact that the Korean wave is still going strong, despite the COVID-19 situation, things seem quite hopeful for the entertainment scene as well as the performing arts scene.
Well, that's where I'm going to jump in then, since you mentioned the other big 800-pound gorilla in the cultural world, and that is, of course, COVID-19. Just to give you a small story, last Saturday, I was going to take my children to go see a theater piece at the Seoul Arts Center, and we called a few hours before the performance was supposed to start, and indeed, the night before, they had canceled it. Which I actually think ended up being mostly the result of the Seoul City government's policy, but I think that they probably would have canceled it even on their own. Obviously live performances in the cultural space, all around Korea, theater pieces, live music events, classical music concerts, traditional music concerts, dance, many of these events have been canceled. So, Nemo, how in particular do you think the music and the performing arts industry has been affected by COVID-19? Whether that be from the business side of things, or whether that be in terms of the the quality of performance, or the new avenues perhaps that artists and performance arts groups have tried to turn to in order to adapt to the new situation?
Well, business-wise, it's at the beginning, going back maybe to March, April, even May time, things were really, really serious, even for the big companies with, high-profile artists, because not naming names, but the situation is mostly the same for everybody in the industry. incomes, you know, 1/3 of their income comes from concert revenues. So all concerts having been cancelled, business was really bad, and they were trying to, you know, I talked to people from the main companies, and they were like totally in panic because
By the way, you can name names. You're welcome to name names.
They probably don't want me to name their names though.
You probably don't. I don't want you to burn your sources. But.
Yeah. Anyway, so I mean, yeah, all the major companies with the high-profile artists, well, their concerts inside and out of Korea were cancelled with no kind of immediate prospect for a, you know, like you couldn't schedule a concert in any time. So there were a lot of them were in panic mode. So that was quite scary for them. And what they soon realized, I think within a few weeks, was that they needed to strengthen their online side. Maybe operate their own platform so that the fans could come to the platform and watch, communicate with the artists, and the artists would maybe give online concerts on that particular platform. And another thing that happened business-wise was that many of these big companies decided to strengthen their merchandise part so that they could somehow compensate for the lack of revenue or the loss of revenue from the concerts. So I know some companies did that pretty quickly. Also, the major chart shows on these channels, we have the oldest chart show on KBS, and we also have one on Mnet and so on. I talked to the executive producer of the KBS K-pop chart show, and what was interesting was his decision not to add the clapping sound or the fan screaming sound after each performance. And I asked him about that because the other channels, they still had the fake sounds. So I asked him, you know, there's no clapping or screaming. And he said, what's the point of having fakery when the artists themselves cannot, you know, they don't have the fans there, so you know there's no point in putting any kind of fakery. And he seemed quite resolute about it, which I found was very interesting.
Well, if I could just jump in real quick and say, you know, this actually leads to something I wanted to ask both Haesung and Jocelyn, which is how has COVID-19 affected your life as performers? And you know, one of the things, of course, that I was thinking about is if you're playing in front of smaller audiences, or in some cases no audience at all, how has that changed your experience of performing? I mean, you know, you don't have applause, potentially you don't have booing, not that you guys would get booing, of course, but you know, how has this changed your life as performers?
Go ahead, Haesung.
Oh, okay. So, well, being an orchestra player, so obviously all our subscription concerts are canceled. So we spent a lot of time at home, of course. And of course, March, April, May, so we stayed at home, and then we were trying to be, but at the same time, it was great opportunity to be more creative and learn the pieces that we wanted to learn always, but we never had time. And also like be more creative. So like making our own music, like, so a lot of my colleagues, they started YouTube channels, and, you know, they really started the thing that they wanted to do for a long time. And doing, of course, obviously we started doing a lot of online concerts too, which means that we spend, for example, we spend the same time wearing makeups than rehearsing. And yeah, and then we had to invite like real professional makeup artists, even for the orchestra performances. And then after being on the performance as a player, as an instrument player, then we always have microphone with us, which means that we really have to take care much more on the details of every single sound. So that actually makes us work much harder than before. because actually when you are at the concert venue, then there's always the excitement that there are people, and so like even if there are like a small noise or some mistake, it's okay because there's the excitement of the place and the time. But then when you're actually doing the online concert, the listening at home, this is like totally different attitude. So we really had to work harder to take care of every single detail of the piece technically. So this is what changes as a performer. How about you, Jocelyn?
Yeah, so I'm more of a soloist. I'm not playing with other people. I'm normally playing sanjo, this kind of with the drum or something like that. The thing for me was that I'm also a professor and all our classes moved online suddenly. So I actually, all our lessons were canceled, all the training sessions for the intangible asset system. I'm not a intangible asset. I'm the lowest level of this hierarchy. I'm the very bottom rung. So I have to receive training from the government. Every week we get training, and then the government takes attendance and they take photos of us to see if we were actually attended, all this kind of stuff. So all that was canceled. All the private lessons were canceled. All the concerts were canceled. So I basically stopped playing because I needed to make 5 movies basically a week for my students. And like you said, Haesung, rather than, like a regular class where you go into the classroom and you take attendance and then you can talk a little bit and you have there was much more focus on the content, which was also being adjudicated by the school. So it took actually about 300% extra time and much more content, much more attention to detail. And of course, I have to teach all my classes in Korean. So it was a lot of translating and preparing much more materials in Korean and PPT, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I actually didn't play during this COVID time. And I only started playing again basically when the semester ended. Then we started up again. We started to have lessons again. But yeah, it was a blistery time then because, I'd lost all the calluses on my fingers and that kind of thing. But one thing that I was really impressed with on the sort of institutional side was how ready the Kugak world was really ready to go online. Everybody just was immediately ready. And even especially the National Kugak Center, they came out with virtual reality videos. And they made a whole series of virtual reality for people that they can watch be inside the performance at home in their virtual reality goggles. They started releasing these videos, and then they made these weekly cancel COVID concerts where they would introduce various genres to make just really nice concerts that were for online, and then all the Kugak Center concerts, also the National Theater, all these places that are venues for the traditional music concert. They were really ready to go online technically, and they really produced beautiful concerts that I really enjoyed, watching from my home. That was really amazing. So yeah,
that's fascinating. Nemo, Nemo, if you don't mind me asking, I mean, has the music industry world also taken those types of steps with, virtual reality as a possibility, or other forms of digitizing the musical experience that concert goers used to have live?
Yes, totally, I would say. Mainly in two different ways. The first one is online concerts. We've had artists who were scheduled to have concerts on site, turning the whole thing into an online performance situation. And also quite a few of artists who normally kind of were shrouded in veil. They decided that now is the time to maybe try to communicate better with fans. A little bit similar to what BTS members have been doing all these years. So they had conversation sessions with fans where they were giving out presents and so on. So the setting became a lot more intimate. So that was a big change. And one thing that was interesting for me was that the big names in the industry, they decided to invest a lot more money into their music videos, to make the music videos a lot more, I mean, not that they weren't fancy before, but they did put a lot more work and a lot more money into the music videos, so that many more people, even before, would be clicking their music videos on YouTube and on other platforms.
I just wanted to point out that in the kugak world, the people who really got hurt were the soloists, the older soloists who are actually really traditional musicians. The ones who are young and into fusion and know how to use the internet and know how to use all the equipment, they're doing okay. But the people that are in their 50s and above who weren't really growing up in the computer age, that don't really know how to use, they know how to use their phones, but they don't really know how to use the computer. They don't know how to edit video. These people are the people who are really, really suffering still. And, to the extent that there was a lot of stuff online, there was a lot of stuff that just simply got canceled and they lost their income. So that's been a really tough time for the real traditional instruments that aren't hooked into institutions.
Well, that actually serves as a pretty good bridge to a question I wanted to ask. That's not the normal type of question that I would ask, because I don't usually, consider the audience members in terms of being consumers or not, but I will in this case, and that is, how can we support performing arts going forward in the medium term? Nobody knows how long this pandemic situation is going to last, but I don't think it's going to be over by next week, next month, or even early next year. So, how can we support our artists, particularly performing artists, going forward in the medium term?
As far as older people need training if they're going to be able to do anything. I mean, lessons have been canceled too. Students haven't shown up. So the lesson fees were gotten rid of. The concert fees were gotten rid of. So really they lost all their income. So I think if the only way to really help them if they're going to join the digital world is to give them some kind of free training and support in that way, and financial support, all the fee, the rent and everything are all still due. So maybe some kind of relief. But I'm sure the Korean government's doing that. I'm not paying attention to what the Korean government's actually doing, but training, I think, is important to how to use the computer. And I mean, we really struggled today. I think we all sort of we can talk about it before we introduce the video, but we all got a little taste of, the troubles that people go through to get stuff online in a live way today. Yeah.
Totally. If someone does the training, I want to go and get the training.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just for the spectators out there, we did have a few small technical difficulties with getting the recorded performance of Haesung and Jocelyn appended to the end of the conversation today. So I'm just gonna sort of wind things down for us and ask I guess two last questions to Haesung and to Jocelyn. The first of which is just, in 1 minute or so, can you tell me a little bit about your instruments, either your personal instrument or the history of your instrument? What do you play? Obviously, the only thing I think I know about the violin is there's a really famous one called a Stradivarius. And, I assume that there might be something similar for a Gayegum. I don't know. So I don't know, just tell me a little bit of something about your instrument. Maybe take a minute each, if you don't mind, just to sort of give us a taste of, this appendage to your bodies.
Well, this time you first, Jocelyn.
Oh. So the instrument I play is called Kayagum, and Kaya, of course, is one of the name of the country that got annexed by Shilla. So it wasn't around for that long, but the Kayagum, according to the Shillok, was modeled on the Chinese zheng, and around, I think, what is it, the 5th century, and the king of Kaya commissioned this guy named Uruk to make the first kayagum based on the jung. And then when it became clear that Kaya was going to get overrun by the Shillonese, he took the kayagum over to Shilla and introduced it to the king there. And the king did not like the music from Kaya. He said, this is hagup, low class countryside music. And he gave it to 3 of his court musicians. I think there was in Pop something mandok at the three court musicians. And he took the 12 pieces that Uruk had come over with and made them into 5 pieces that recomposed them according to Shilla taste. And at that point, the king praised it as great music, and we got the kayagum as an instrument that we still play today. But when it went to, so it came from China, originally the jung, then it became the kayagum. But the instrument that went to Japan is known in Japan as the shiragi koto, which means shillagum. It's not kayagum, but shillagum. So that we get the koto through the transmission of the instrument over there. The original instruments probably starting from a hunting bow, something like that. And then we get something called, the kongho. It's like a harp style instrument. And when you lay it over, then it becomes called the sleeping kongho. And then you start to see the shape of the kayagum start to emerge. Bridges were added. So it's got a very, very long history. But kayagum is from Kaya, the country of Kaya, and kum just means musical instrument.
Fascinating. Haesung.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Kaya is actually supposed to be kind of mysterious lost kingdom, isn't it? So that makes this really fascinating. I have violin right here. So everybody knows violin, and it's from a viol family. So I wish I knew actually exactly, I could explain exactly like how Jocelyn does, but I know the viol family existed from the at least the 15th to 16th centuries, and it's Italian instrument. So there's violin in the viol family, and then before they used to play viol like this, and there's viol and viol, and then there's violoncello, which is bigger, still you play like this, and then the violin is the smallest one, so you play like this. But during the Baroque period, they could even play this way. And there's this famous violinist called Paganini in the 19th century, so who made this violin very, very solist instrument. So he raised it totally the technique of the instrument. So that's it. And then what I love about violin is like it is a Western instrument, but because it's a string instrument, so there is so much there is actually more more aspect to Asian instrument. So like you can actually produce microtones. So the tune is not fixed. So you actually have to go to find the notes, which makes this instrument really difficult, but at the same time, it's real fun to play.
That is a really wonderful answer. Thank you so much to both of you for that. One other sort of just very quick question: do your instruments have names? Like I give a name to my car, or
what's your car's name?
The new car doesn't have a name. The old one, by the way, was called, speaking of Italy, was called Romeo, because we were looking at one car that was called the Juliet. That was the actual name of the car. It was this old terrible thing designed by like Daewoo or something like that. And we saw this other one and we said, we'll take that one instead. And so instead of getting Juliet, we took Romeo. Romeo died, much as in the real story, a fantastic and legendary death, which I can share. I can share with the 3 of you some other time privately. Romeo died a fantastic death, just as in Shakespeare's version of the story as well. So car's name is Romeo. We have a new one, and we don't know what to call it yet. We'll figure that part out. But Haesung, Jocelyn, do your instruments have names? You're free to say no, of course.
No.
No, I never thought about it, but it's a great idea. Actually, I have to think of a name now. Today, I'll do that today. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't
rush it. Don't rush it. The name has to work. It has to fit.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's my thought. So I just want to let the audience know that we have the tremendous pleasure to be able to show you a video recording of a piece, a duet, in fact, that Haesung and Jocelyn were kind enough to think about, rehearse, and then record. And we're going to finish our roundtable with that video. So before we do that, I thought it would be nice to have Jocelyn and Haesung briefly introduce the piece that they're going to play.
Haesung, do you want to introduce about the piece and about the poem 달하 높이곰? And I'll introduce the composer.
Okay. Oh, well, actually, I can say very little about this piece because, of course, it's originally written for Kayagum. And, you know, like everyone knows here, the expert of Kayagum is Jocelyn, not me.
But you read that, yeah.
But I can surely say something about the poem, which this piece is based on. So it's ancient Baekje poem. Actually, the poem is about a woman waiting for her husband, and then she's praying to the moon that the moon will keep him safe. So, well, I had to look for this today just for this session, but that really makes me very close to this piece. And also, I must say how much I enjoyed actually playing with Kayagum. This is my first time to play a duo with Kayagum, and then I found that the sound really matches so wonderfully. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for putting us together, Mason. This was a really great collaboration. I really enjoyed playing with Haesung, and we both have a background in working with composers and new music, so that was also really great. And I've been playing traditional music lately, so good to play sort of a new piece. I mean, it's not that new, but it's not traditional music. So what we played is a piece composed by Hwon Byung-gi. Hwon Byung-gi passed away almost 2 years ago now, but he was sort of considered the father of modern Kayagum music. He's the first composer to play both court music and folk music. So he played both like 정악 and then also sanjo. And he started right before the Korean War, and he was, evacuated down in Busan, and he studied Kayagum in Busan when the Kugagwan, the National Kugak Center, was moved down to Busan, and then it came back to Seoul in 1955, I think. So he was the first guy to cross over between folk music and Korean traditional music, Korean folk music and court music. And then he was also one of the first professors of Korean traditional music. I think he got hired first by Seoul National University, and then he was the big Kayagum professor at Pai University for much of his career. And he's the first guy who started a PhD program in Kayagum performance. So his first two students that came out of that program were my teachers. I studied in the very beginning with Lee Ji-young and then GAD, who were both of his students. And eventually I also studied with him before he passed away. So for about 5 years before he died, I studied with him. And I was looking for a piece to play at a art exhibition. So I asked him if he had any pieces that had to do with paintings. And so this 달하 높이곰 is both a poem and also a famous painting. So he gave me that. And it was originally written for 17-string Kayagum. And at the time I didn't have one. So he helped me buy an 18-string Kayagum. So this was the first time I played this sort of non-12-string Kayagum. And so it was my first time playing these bigger, louder instruments, which was really great. And I played it as a solo first. And then he had written he has an unpublished score with flute, which of course is written in C, and so violin can play the flute part. So when you suggested that we play together, I thought, I have this piece, and I'd forgotten that it was for 17-string Kayagum, not 12-string Kayagum. So I had to brush off the instrument and brush off my reading skills for the 17-string Kayagum. But it works really, really well with violin, and especially to have such a great player to work with. That just made it so beautiful. And we only had one day to prepare. we practiced for what, a few hours, and then we just recorded it. So it's, it's kind of more like a rehearsal type of tape, but both of us enjoyed it, and I think we came up with something that's not too embarrassing to share.
Well, I'm absolutely certain that your expertise will shine through. So with that, I want to leave our audience, first of all, with my thanks on behalf of the Asia Society Korea for watching this month's roundtable. And I hope that you enjoy the piece which will directly follow, Taho no Bikom. And secondly, I want to extend my gratitude to Jocelyn, to Nemo, and to Haesung for joining me today and providing their insights about performing artistry, and in particular, the performing arts of music in Korea, both in general and with respect to COVID-19 and the effect that that is having on the performing arts industry as well. So I want to thank everyone again. And please enjoy the wonderful piece of music to follow. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mason. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.